Yeah, what is going on, AP people? We have the Progressive Era review video for you today. You know it'll be on your test. It's actually been a while since APUSH exam has asked about it in a written essay format, so you never know. Maybe this year is the year. Know this. You will see it often on your exam, I promise you. All right, let's do an intro on what the Progressive Era is. It is a period of reform on the national and state levels from 1900 until 1920. And who were progressives? Very important to know who were progressives. They were women, members of the middle class, and people that lived in urban areas. Please know, do not confuse the progressives with the populists in terms of who made them up. The populists were mostly farmers out in the West and the Midwest. The progressives were mostly middle-class urban people, but they did share similar ideas, as we will see. Some things that carried over into the progressive era from the populist era included the direct election of senators, which becomes the 17th Amendment, railroad regulation, secret ballot, and income tax, which is the 16th Amendment, just to name a couple things. Okay, muckrakers, need to know them. So important. I'm going to give you a list of authors that you must know for your APUSH exam. Muckrakers are authors and journalists that expose societal ills. Some famous journalists, everybody knows Upton Sinclair. He wrote The Jungle, which helped pave the way for the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. All three of those things, Pure Food and Drug, Meat Inspection, and The Jungle, are from 1906, and there is Upton Sinclair there. Jacob Riis, another very famous muckraker, he wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives, and these were a series of photographs that exposed poor living conditions for immigrants in New York City. Lincoln Steffens, with his sweet mustache, look at the whiskers on that guy, he wrote a book called The Shame of Cities, and this exposed corruption between city or municipal. Know that term municipal, it means city government, and business. Ida Tarbell, her father worked in the oil industry, and he had lots of complaints about the ruthlessness of Standard Oil Company. So Ida Tarbell wrote about the harsh treatment of other businesses by the Standard Oil Company. There are two Idas you need to know from this time period. Don't confuse them. You want to know how you remember? Look at Tar in Tarbell. Tar equals oil. Ida Tarbell wrote about the Standard Oil Company. And finally, Frank Norris, with this really creepy haircut, he wrote a book called The Octopus, and it was all about the railroad corruption. Look at him. Is that guy not from the early 1900s or what? That's like a beautiful part right down the middle. Famous progressives. We're going to throw out three more people you need to know. Robert La Follette. He was the governor of Wisconsin. Also goes on to be a senator from there. Named one of the 5 most significant senators in the history of the U.S. Senate. He is credited with introducing the direct primary, allowing people to vote for candidates for the presidential election in their respective parties. The initiative, which means that citizens can initiate or introduce a law. Referendums, citizens can vote on a law. And a recall, which means that they can get rid of an elected official. Keep in mind, these are on the state reform levels. This is not a national level. Initiative, referendum, and recall only applies to states. And doesn't it look like Joe Pesci? Maybe it's just me, but I think they're twins. I feel like that could be a game. Is that Joe Pesci or is that Robert La Follette? All right, Jane Addams, very famous. She's the founder of the Hull House in Chicago. This aided women, children, and immigrants, helped them adjust to life in the big city. Florence Kelly was a woman who was from the Hull House and became a very influential woman. She advocated increased rights for women, children, and African Americans, and she was a leader of the National Consumer League, which called for boycotts of goods made by children and workers in bad working situations. 3 presidents you need to know. First one, Teddy Roosevelt. He is credited with the square deal, 3 C's. First one is consumer protection. This is seen in the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. I hope you remember what book they were passed in response to. Yes, The Jungle, you know that. Corporate regulation, he wanted to control trust. Keep in mind, although Teddy Roosevelt is known as a trust buster, he only wanted to regulate them. He did not want to get rid of all trust. He distinguished between good and bad trusts. One of the bad trusts was the Northern Securities Company, and you see him here strangling it. He's beating up the Northern Securities Company. It was a railroad company owned by J.P. Morgan. It is broken up. After this, he is known as the trust buster. An example of regulation of corporations is the Hepburn Act. This is passed to increase the power of the Interstate Commerce Commission, and it could regulate railroad companies' prices. The third C is the conservation of natural resources. He was a huge outdoorsman. And an example of this is the Newlands Reclamation Act, and the use of money from the sale of lands out west was to be used towards irrigation projects to improve certain areas of the country. And he was considered very progressive in the Anthracite coal mine strike. This is when he sided against the owners and threatened to seize the mines. The workers go on strike. The owner of the coal mine refuses to negotiate with them. Every time in history up until Teddy Roosevelt, when workers go on strike, the government has sided with the business. This time, Teddy Roosevelt sides against the owners. Know that, know that, know that. All right, Taft. Really simple. He was the real trust buster, busted up twice as much. There was a falling out between Teddy and Taft because Taft did the following. 1, broke up good trust, and 2, fired this guy, Gifford Pinchot, who was boys with Teddy Roosevelt. And those two things led to Teddy Roosevelt to run in the 1912 election, splitting votes between the two Republican candidates, even though Teddy Roosevelt was running on the Bull Moose Party, thus guaranteeing that Woodrow Wilson becomes president. His platform was known as New Freedom. He wanted a couple things. 1, to lower the tariffs. You know he wanted lower tariffs because he was a Democrat. Democrats want the tariff rates to go down. An example of this is the Underwood tariff. He wanted to eliminate trusts. He didn't care whether they were good or bad. He hated them all. He wanted to kill them all. An example of this is the Clayton Antitrust Act, which gives more strength to the previous Sherman Antitrust Act. And something unique about the Clayton Antitrust Act that you need to know is that labor unions were exempt from prosecution. They were not under Sherman, but they are under Clayton. He also wanted to reform the banking system, and we see the Federal Reserve Act, which creates the Federal Reserve, or the modern-day banking system. Okay, some African Americans that you need to know from the Progressive Era. Big idea, African Americans were essentially left out of government reforms during the Progressive Era. There were virtually no civil rights laws passed during the Progressive Era, so this is a downside to the Progressive Era. W.E.B. Du Bois, with another sweet mustache there, he was the first African American to receive a PhD from Harvard, so pretty much a genius. He demanded an immediate end to segregation, and he helped form the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. B Wells Barnett is a hugely influential woman, African American woman. Here's the other Ida I told you about. She's not associated with Standard Oil. She advocated an end to lynching. You must know B Wells was against lynching. B Wells was against lynching. And many African Americans fought in World War I, which happened U.S. at least from 1917 to 1918, and they sought more rights upon returning home. They did not get them, but that was one reason why somebody like W.E.B. Du Bois advocated for African Americans to fight in World War I. Some amendments, 4 of them you need to know. 16th Amendment is the graduated income tax. The higher in income, the more tax one pays. So if you make a lot of money, you'll pay more in taxes than somebody who doesn't. 17th Amendment is the direct election of senators. You need to know that prior to this, in the Constitution, the way it was written, senators were elected by state legislatures. So this increases the political power of citizens in a state. The 18th Amendment is prohibition, outlaws alcohol. This is influenced by groups such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and this is considered a progressive failure. One reason is we have an increase in crime. And finally, the 19th Amendment, passed in 1920, which is signaled as the end of Reconstruction, is women's suffrage. And Alice Paul was a very influential woman who demanded women's suffrage. It passed DBQ, a Progressive Era DBQ, 2003, I believe it was. Shows a picture of Alice Paul with a sign calling President Wilson Kaiser Wilson because women were not allowed to vote. All right, let's do a quick analysis of the Progressive Era. How could it be seen as effective? If you ever had to write an essay about the Progressive Era, AP essays are just never as simple as tell me everything you know about this. You have to make a determination. Is something good? Is it bad? Is it effective? Is it ineffective? What was the impact of it? So if we want to look at how it can be seen as effective, there are several reforms, such as child labor and women's labor. So there are laws that are passed by Congress that makes it illegal for under 16 for children to work in interstate commerce. Women's labor, and there you go, bye-bye, no more child labor. In women's labor, women were restricted in the number of hours they could work, which was seen as a boost to women. You see increased participation in politics, or at least the opportunities, through the initiative, referendum, recall. on the state level, and then the 17th Amendment on the national level. With the 17th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, of course, which is the women's suffrage as well. Trusts were broken up during this time period. Thanks, Teddy. Thanks, Taft. Thanks, Wilson. How could it be seen as ineffective? There was a lack of civil rights reforms. That's a huge percentage of the population that was left out of the progressive era reforms. And the 19th Amendment, although it does grant women the right to vote, it comes at the end of the progressive era, 1920, at the very end. So for most of the progressive era, women were not allowed to vote. And prohibition was also a failure. It leads to an increase in organized crime, and it's repealed 13 years later. Okay, that's pretty much everything you need to know about the progressive era for your APUSH test. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you have not already. Tell everybody in your class about this video, please. Tell your teacher, your friends, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, your parents, whomever you talk to. Tell everybody you encounter about this. Put it on Twitter, put it on Facebook. And let me know, is this Robert La Follette or Joe Pesci? See, I told you it could be a game. And I wish you guys nothing but the best of luck on your AP test. Thank you for watching. Have a good day, guys.